Well, Murph, boy, it is time to talk about God of War.
Am I ready? Am I
Are you
ready?
ready?
Am I ready, boy?
Yeah. Uh, we both played Ragnarok, and it is one of those games. I don't necessarily think it's a 10 out of 10, but it is a game where you have a lot to talk about.
It is a
You
game
know, for
worth
people,
talking about.
yeah, for people that talk about like how cinematic it is and stuff. I don't know, man. I think there's gonna be a lot here to say other than it was a good movie. Um, but before we do that, Murph, what is your experience? I already know this answer, but I'm asking for the cast. With the original God of War games.
So the original God of War games, I played them when like 1 and 2 when they came out on the PS2, and then just sort of fell off. Never got a PS3, but God of War was one of those first series that I did like the full playthrough on because I wanted to be prepped for God of War 4 or whatever we're calling that, God of War 2016.
It's 2018, but continue.
2018, yes. So yeah, that was the very first series I had played through every like entry of in sequence. I think it's a pre-Norse times. I think the series is pretty varied. Even like the PSP entries have some of the best like fights. I would even list off. The very last entry, Ascension, is bad, and I don't like it. Uh,
Well, I mean, I think that probably says a lot about why they wanted to reboot.
yeah,
The thing I was gonna say was, for me, I only played 1 through 3. I played the trilogy,
yeah.
and I didn't play the side stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I think I made an okay choice. I think I will survive. But that being said, I think for me, it was like a. I call it. All right, let me see if you agree with this. I call it the Mortal Kombat of character action games.
Mm.
Would
Yeah,
you
I can
agree with
see that.
this?
I can see that. It's just such a different time. It feels like
Yes.
Jin, when you talk about games that wouldn't get made today, or just like projects that wouldn't get made today, I think like original PS2 God of War 1 in like all of its aspects would not get made today. And if it did, it would not be received in nearly the same way. It'd be getting like 4 out of 10s. I don't like gameplay wise, I don't think it holds up. Thematically, I don't think it holds up. It,
I think there's an element, there's an element where it had some influence. I think the thing is like it always wanted to be like a quote unquote serious series in terms of like, oh, this is a AAA game.
mhm.
It just serious meant something different back in early 2000s.
I think I think the
Where
best
you could have camp. Go
I
ahead.
think the best delineation I've able to come up with is the Greek God of War games are adult, the Norse ones are mature.
Okay, all right. That hey there you go. I think I think storytelling was always a focus for them, but just heavy camp. And for the gameplay itself, I think the gameplay is like serviceable. I don't think it's bad. Mediocre possibly,
I
especially in
think
compared to like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. But like, I don't know. You see a lot of imitators of God of War
mhm.
because that was the easier thing to imitate.
I think only like the first game in Ascension I would like label as bad. I like the second one and I like the spectacle of the third one. Like
I agree.
they're definitely
Yeah.
not entries I think should be like lost to time.
No, no. And I think the big things to note were like specific encounters or boss fights. I think boss fights were always like quote unquote the big thing about these series of games. So like, you know, the fucking Colossus of Rhodes in God of War 2 is like a big deal. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think that goes into 2018, my problems with it. But also, there's a lot I love about 2018. 2018 did some like hard growing up. What did you think of the first Norse entry?
You know, it's one of those ones where it came out and like everyone was like gushing about it. And I heard the statement that came up so often was like this changes AAA video games. And I don't believe that, but I think it shows that video games have changed since the original God of War.
Yeah,
And
These games are very much of their times.
yeah, and I think it really shows that, when you have a good writing team on hand, you can definitely reclaim and recontextualize some of these uglier aspects of like gaming history, like taking a character like Kratos and have him do some like actual growing up from, in his later years. And
Go ahead, continue.
and just like, sort of changing like the relationships to the bit of the old ultra violence and masculinity and whatnot, and using him as an archetype for that. And I love the 2018 game and story. Um,
Um, yeah, I think I talked in a server with Theomony, who was once on the cast,
mhm.
and she brought up a very similar game for how it deals with history and characters, which is Wolfenstein: The New Order,
Yeah.
where there was a number one, there was a history of BJ Blazkowicz as like the guy that just massacres and destroys Nazis. And so many games, etc., etc., these characters have their own mythologies to them, right? Kratos is a mythology unto himself because of all the games we've played through.
Hmm.
So when he finally gets to a more serious uh, work or whatever, we still know the gravity of stuff. Where it's like Kratos is like, yo, I've done some fucked up shit. You believe it. No one else
Hmm.
is entirely sure how deep it goes, but the audience is. And I think that's really rewarding.
Yeah. And I think with like Ragnarok is because before 2018 came out and we really had like an idea of what the tone of it was, there was that leak. There was some concept art that was leaked that's like, oh, it's Kratos in Norse lands. And people were like, oh, okay, this is just going to be like, more ultra violence. Kratos is going to cause Ragnarok. And then, I guess in the most cliche way, someone asked, like, but what if Kratos talked to the people he wanted to kill? Hmm? And I think the game is better for it.
Absolutely, because we'll get into it, but I guess for final moments of 2018 before we actually talk about the meat of the episode, I think the one thing that like I think 2018's biggest problems are its weird imbalance of scale where it
Hmm.
wants to be a deeply personal game from Kratos and Atreus's father-son relationship and spreading their Atreus's mother's ashes on the Jotunheim mountain. That's like an intensely personal story that is like deep or whatever. But then it wants a very grand scale for content
Hmm.
and the side quests and all of that stuff. And number one, I don't think the combat was fully fleshed out for the runtime of all the side quests, and I don't think the side quests are particularly fulfilling
Yeah.
in 2018 specifically.
I don't remember
So
many of the 2018 side quests other than like the kill all the trolls, talk to the ghosts, Valkyries.
yes, those are the main ones, and then the best ones would be the Valkyrie boss fights, and
Hmm.
that's really it, right?
Yeah. I think
And
2018 has those like issues of trying to like reconcile with what like game genre was at that time period. It's like it needs to be sort of soulsy in the combat. It needs to be like an open world, and I think they kind of just barely didn't thread the needle. Because I think the world is just like a little too big, and there's like a few too many like dead ends with some of the side quests. I think if it's like
not just that,
fewer.
but there's also like heavy repeat characters.
Hmm.
There's a lot less variety in terms of gameplay options for you as a player and bosses and enemies in 2018. There's a lot of repasted
A lot of
stuff.
trolls.
I'm not, yeah, a lot of trolls. And this is a series known for boss battles. And I mean, like, Baldur was cool and all that, and it all works out. But yeah, in terms of threading the needle, it doesn't hit that 10 out of 10 for me because of that. Now, I guess going into Ragnarok, where does Ragnarok immediately fall? Does it thread the needle?
I think because this I'm just like kind of fresh off finishing. I think I think it's probably like a 9 out of 10 for me. It's probably gonna make like my top 5, top 3 for like when we do our end of the year look back. Um,
Okay.
just like I think it's probably the best God of War game. I'll say that like
I
flat out.
agree.
Um,
I would agree with that. Yeah.
it's one of those things where I think it's very good like in of itself. I could see it being ruined if they're like wanting to do another one, you know. But we can get into that. We can get into like future of the franchise later.
Yeah, I'm wondering the structure at which I didn't prepare for this clearly. Um, I guess the first thing I'll open up with. Are we doing spoilers right out the gate? Should we just do spoilers out the gate?
Yeah, I think because I have a lot of
All right, listener. If you don't want to hear about Ragnarok spoilers, you got your 10 minutes of me talking about other things, of Murph talking about other things. Turn off the podcast now.
yeah.
All right. So, gameplay wise, I think the drop near spear and then the extra elements added are perfectly enough for a very satisfying combat experience that was missing in 2018. There's enough enemy variety, and then the side quests are much more personally fulfilling. There's still some garbage like you collect X amount of these or go to
Yeah.
rifts or whatever, but like in some of the major worlds you'll have actual major side quests relating to side characters like Mimir and what he did in his past. And those things help inform the larger text and in my opinion should be played through. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah, they're very character-driven side quests, and I did pretty
Yes.
much all of those, save for like the destroy Draugr pits and whatnot quests.
Yeah. Yep. How did you feel about the opening?
The opening, like with the Thor fight and everything.
All of it. Yeah, tell me about all of it.
You know, I love this game's like take on Thor, and I here's what I'm gonna say. This game hits pretty much all the notes that I had predicted it was going to hit. Um, when finishing like the game in 2018 and like diving into Norse mythology and such. What like Thor's ultimate fate I didn't predict, but I was like, okay, it's gonna open with Thor fighting Kratos, and that's gonna be a distraction so Odin can talk to Atreus.
How do you feel about tell me more about Odin and Thor's characterizations. What do you like about him?
I love this interpretation of Odin because he's kind of doing like the James Woods as Hades. Like, what if he was just like a huckster, which is like what Odin is in myth. He's not really powerful. He's just more tricky. And so when he like shows up and he's like talking in this very neutral sort of tone, like kind of like your old great uncle, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then he gets like all these like comedic bits, but the entire time you're like, no, this guy is something's off about him because everyone else is like, no, this is one of the worst people imaginable. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and like he has just enough. I think Richard Schiff's performance is like just enough possible veneer of relatability or like maybe he's not so bad that like it completely sells the full performance of no, he is actually that bad and he is just putting on a show to get whatever he wants however he can.
yeah, and looking
You know.
looking back at some of those opening scenes, like having finished the game, like some of the little touches, like Thor at this point in time is supposed to be trying to like go sober, but in that moment you see like Odin like offer him a cup of mead, being like, "Come on, you're gonna need this if you're gonna be going toe to toe with Kratos here."
And also Odin is like, and you can see this in the dynamics of father son relationships. In a way, Thor is both meant to represent Kratos in the quote unquote destroyer archetype, but also Atreus in the son with like a very difficult father relationship. So like you can see Odin like he also says, "I like you better when you were drunk." So
Yeah.
Odin tries to bring out the worst of Thor because the worst of Thor is the most useful to him. So and then it becomes very dangerous and it's kind of heartbreaking by the end of the game.
Yeah, I definitely would not have predicted Odin being the one to axe Thor. Because in myth, Fenrir is the one that takes out Thor. So I thought it
Wait,
was
wait. If I wait, isn't it doesn't Jormungandr's poison take out Thor? I'm
Jormungandr's poison takes out Odin. if I
Oh, I
remember.
thought Fenrir took out Odin. My
Yeah,
bad. I don't know. We'll cliff notes this later, dear viewer. But
yeah,
anyways, the game completely disregards a lot of the established lore because Loki is Atreus.
yeah.
So there's not like a huge legacy of like what Loki has done with Asgard.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like all of the children of Loki and Angrboda are like basically made in this game tops. And it's like Fenrir is just a dog
Yeah.
that Atreus really likes. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that was a bit of a
Um,
bait and switch for me when they're like, "Oh, we need to go back and see Fenrir," and I'm like leaning forward, like, "Oh yeah, yeah, Fenrir, the wolf that takes out Thor," but then that wolf dies in the first 5 minutes.
yeah.
Uh, and
Um,
then that comes back
and
beautifully with when fighting Garm.
oh, and I will say, at the very least, I remember this. They do set up in the games, at least for the mythology, that Jormungandr's poison affects Thor um, because Thor's injuries stay with Kratos' axe. And
Yeah,
in 2018, I think 2018 sets up a lot. It's a huge game of like setup for the payoff of Ragnarok. Because in 2018, for instance, Kratos throws his axe into the lake so Jormungandr could imbue it with poison.
yeah.
So it's stuff like that that sort of pays off in a way that it didn't really in 2018 by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the games are beautiful at like subtly setting things up, subtly like leaving a trail. Um, the 2018 kind of does that where it's uh Atreus gets those holly arrows and then he
You
wears
mean
that on his
mistletoe?
lapel
Question
and
mark.
that's ultimately what breaks
Yes.
Baldur's curse.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And then like you'll see little moments like Faye, or Frigg or Freya. My bad. I always mix up Faye and Freya. Freya sees those arrows and is like, these are bad arrows. Get rid of these arrows. And in the context of the original game, if you don't know any other context, it's confusing at first. But then it's like, oh, she's protecting Baldur. And she's protecting her son, etc., etc. So at the start of this game, she's pissed off that you killed Baldur in the first game, even though by all accounts he had it coming. Um,
Yeah. I Do we want to talk about Freya's involvement overall in the game? Because that's one of the things I'm shaky on.
well, let's talk about in a gameplay sense, real quick. They expanded companions, which is,
Mm.
I think, really brilliant. They needed to do that. And so companions have a lot more combat options and are much more fleshed out and varied. For Kratos, you will have Atreus and Freya. As spoiler alert, you play as Atreus for chunks of the game. You'll have Angrboda, Thrud, and Thor, and those are also equally interesting. I think maybe the Atreus segments have less going on, but I still enjoyed the Atreus segments. So if
Yeah.
you want to talk about that before we talk about Freya, we can.
I think the Atreus segments are they're very linear. There's no side quests to do as Atreus. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's what may be glaring, but I think it's also a sign that, well, I was about to say maybe this game should have been more linear, but but we already discussed that with like the side quests here are much better than they were in 2018.
Yeah. Yep. It's a tough balance to walk, but I think the puzzles, for instance, are also better. I think they're more suited for combinations, like the runic stuff, where you can chain the runic elements with the axe and all that. I think that all works better. I think the chains of, or not the chains of Olympus, the blades of chaos. They're less of an end all be all. They're much more for crowd control and fire
Yeah.
damage. And the frost axe, the Leviathan axe is what it's called, and the Dropnir spear have their own purposes and uses for them. I personally like the Dropnir spear a lot. I think that is
Yeah.
an awesome weapon.
No, I think that's a great addition. That was something like when it was like, oh, there's a whole new weapon. That's cool. Um, because then it's
A
like
lot of people thought it was going to be Mjolnir, for instance,
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I'm glad they didn't.
And it's like the whole thematically with the spear, it's like the first thing that's like, truly made for Kratos in his arsenal. It is a weapon of his own. Because
Yeah, and it's literally like one of the first lines in it is like Brock says, "Oh, you've used this spear before," and he's like, "It's the first weapon Spartans learn." And then so like they combine the Norse mythology of the Draupnir ring with the Kratos symbol of the spear as like a very identifiable Greek aspect, and combine that into something very God of War Norse mythology. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it's peanut butter and chocolate.
someone on the team really likes the PSP game Ghost of Sparta because that's the one that has Deimos, Kratos' brother, and it's also the one that has a secondary weapon that's a Spartan spear and shield. And the
Isn't the
mechanics,
spear also infinite in that game, and that doesn't have an explanation?
yeah, you can just throw multiple spears.
Different time, Murph. It's a different time. What like I also forgot for other companions they had Brock and Sindri.
Yeah.
And Brock and Sindri have their own big character elements to them. They were quite lovable in the original game as a blacksmithing duo. Here they're less like compelling as companions. They're part of the lesser breed of like, oh, you just press square and then they'll do something.
Yeah.
But
they're very early on it felt very like dwarf ex machina for a lot of things. It's like we have this problem, and Sentry will pop out being like, "Oh yeah, I invented something that fixes that. I've removed the need to use Tyr's Temple to travel between realms." Um,
how
and
convenient.
things like that. But I think that's for the best because it gets the ball rolling and lets you get to other realms earlier on. And the dwarves to me just kind of faded into the background until it got to their big moment with Brock's death and Sindri's complete change in character, and it all adds up. I was just reading an interview with Corey Balrog where he was talking about Sindri's development, and he was talking about it's like the story The Giving Tree. By the end of it, Sindri is just kind of given everything he can and gotten nothing in return. He is just a stump.
Yeah.
And I think it's for the best that he doesn't forgive Kratos and Atreus at the end, because I think that would tie up everything too well with a bow, and it shows that their actions do have consequences.
Yeah, and then the other thing is it's important for one character in the cast to still have like a very big problem and thirst for vengeance, because by the time we hit Ragnarok, the key characters have sort of overcome their personal development. Kratos is beyond vengeance by the point of Ragnarok. He's like, vengeance, I did that. I literally did that for like 6 games. I'm good. And so did Freya. Freya's like, by the end of it, like, I don't need Odin to do this for me. Or like, I don't need Odin to like
I don't need Odin's death to make me whole.
Exactly. So for Sindri to be still broken by it is very important for someone to be like, no, Odin needs to fucking die.
Yeah.
Like right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that moment.
Let's rewind back to the Brock death, because it basically leads, let's back up even further to when you save Tyr in, which one's the fucking Svartalfheim?
Yeah.
Yep, the dwarf realm, right? What were your thoughts on saving Tyr and the Tyr buildup?
I thought it was so because there was that E3 trailer where they just reveal like, yep, Tyr's alive and you rescue him, which is weird because like the whole game of 2018 is like following, like learning about Tyr, how he traveled to all these different pantheons and such, and what a cool guy he was, and that he was dead. He was dead and gone, and that's why there's no one left to oppose Odin. And then for it to just drop the info in a trailer, yeah, he's alive, he's gonna help out. And then the very first like true level of the game being rescue Tyr. That definitely threw me for a loop. And then Tyr was very intentionally kind of off and disappointing.
Yes.
I did not call the like ultimate twist that he was Odin in disguise. But it's
what did you think was going on with him? Did you just think that eventually at some point he was gonna change?
Because when it was building to that scene, when I finally got like the mask, I was thinking to myself like, So, what is Tyr's purpose in this story other than to be just like the dissenting opinion in conversations? Um,
Yeah.
and I thought like, are they really going to go like the very foreseeable route of he's going to turn around and become the god of war again? Or is
Yeah.
he going to get killed? Is he like an Odin sleeper agent? Like I never predicted that he was never even like real to begin with. But it's one of
Yeah.
those things where if you like look back at those cutscenes, there's like all those clues. Like when Atreus hands him a spear, and he's like, "What do I need a walking stick for?" And then later you see Odin using his spear as a walking stick.
Yeah. And they also have there's just different elements. One of the big ones, obviously, is the font difference between Tyr and all that. I think for in story purposes, that last speech, you see like Tyr give like the rousing speech of like, I know a way into Asgard. I've seen my purpose now. I think Odin was like trying to play into both audience and like prophecy expectations. They're like, oh yeah, Tyr's supposed to lead Ragnarok. So he's like, I know a way into Ragnarok. Let's fucking do it. But then beautifully, Brock is like, wait 1 second, this doesn't pass the smell test.
Yeah.
This
I love
this,
that Brock.
this doesn't make sense.
I love that Brock is the one to call it out because he does. He says from the start that he like doesn't believe in prophecy and all that. He just sees people as they are.
Brock is also like for me the exact opposite of Odin in a lot of ways. Like for instance, so the big like drama between the brothers is that apparently big lore bombshell. Brock had died years and years ago before the events of like 2018. I'm guessing that's the real reason why he's blue and not the reason Sindri gave before.
Yeah.
But anyways, there's a part of his soul that's gone. And so Brock eventually learns this when making the Dropnir spear that there's a part of his soul that's missing. And he's like, well, shit. And later on, Mimir's like, hey, if you die and you don't have that part of your soul, there's no afterlife for you. There's no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And like for Brock, what's different is he's okay with these things. Like his last words to Sindri are like, I know what you did. It's time to let go. And in those terms, to me personally, that is the exact opposite of Odin's whole thing.
Yeah.
Odin wants to prevent his death no matter possible. And if he does die, he wants to know what's after. Like what happens after. He needs to know.
It's one of those things where it's like the story. It was only in that Odin fight that I realized that like, oh, this is one of those stories that's like, what's the meaning of life is you give your life your own meaning through like the people around you. And so when Odin's shouting like, what was it all for? What's the point of any of this? And it really, while being beaten down by like 3 people that have like formed a familial relationship and are stronger because of that, it's I know this is a cliche, especially with the podcast episode that just went up, but this game gave me very intense Kingdom Hearts energy.
Oh my gosh. The power of friendship, the power of family.
Well, just like even like
thing.
You go to different worlds and you get unique companions in each of those places. That just gave me vibes.
Fair enough.
How'd you feel about the mask as a plot device?
I think at first I didn't jive with it, and by the end of it I did.
Yeah.
I think it
When it first was revealed, I was like, this is not what is this? This isn't in the Prose Edda. What are we talking about? I thought it was going to be like some sort of 5D chest Athena play, because when
I got Athena vibes too because of the green.
Yeah, when Atreus read it, those first few words he reads were in Greek, and I was like, oh, this is a Greek artifact. Like this is where it's all coming full circle. But then someone like pulled out the model for the mask and did like a scan on it, and it actually has a bunch of different languages written on it, all from like confirmed pantheons in the universe. There's Norse, there's Greek, there's Egyptian, there's Japanese, there's Celtic. No, I just like that that's like, Odin's motivation, because in myth, Odin's entire thing is about quest for knowledge, quest for like self-preservation. And that's why he's so tricky.
What he's willing to sacrifice for this knowledge too. He's willing to sacrifice his eye, but he's also willing to sacrifice his family because he doesn't give a fuck. Whereas Kratos is the exact opposite. Whereas like family is the only thing for Kratos at this point in time. because that's the only path for, redemption or whatever you call it for Kratos. Let's talk about Heimdall. How did you feel about Heimdall?
You just want to talk about your favorite character.
I'm serious though. Like, 'cause I think Heimdall is an important part
Yeah.
of the Asgard experience.
You hit the nail on the head by saying, like, Heimdall is a Greek era character brought into this to, like, really, like, drive home how different this era of the franchise is and how different slash not different Kratos is now. Because he's definitely giving shades of, like, Hermes in God of War 3 and things like that. Like, his initial reveal with Atreus, like, on top of the wall of Asgard, I think just is such a beautiful introduction. And then there's the bit where he just sends the soldiers to attack Atreus, and then it's his turn. You can't land a blow on him. And you finally get to the boss fight with him as Kratos, and it's such a beautiful melding of, like, the actual combat, the story implications, and, like, I think it's the first time where I've played a boss fight where it's like the boss has, like, the special power where you can't hit them, and it really felt like I had to outthink them to overcome that obstacle.
Yeah, he was my favorite boss fight. And I will say this game has a lot more enemy types and a lot more varied boss fights. I liked the Nidhogg, for instance. Mm-hmm. I liked all that stuff. But for Heimdall especially, I liked the problem solving you had to do on the fly, where if you fired at him directly, it wouldn't work. You had to blow it up, and at first it works if he just catches it, but then he doesn't catch it.
Yeah, then he catches
Then he
Wise.
just fucking deflects it. Yeah, he catches Wise, so then you have to, like, shoot it at the ground, and then it's not good enough to shoot it at the ground. You have to, like, wait for him to get to it. Like, he has to, like, forget that that's there, and then you trick him into it. So for me, that's all really, really fun. I love that.
And then the entire time he's still just talking shit. And then you blow up his arm, and then he just, like, goes completely feral. Like, the facade completely drops, and he forces Kratos' hand. And I don't know if this was intentional on the devs, but I was definitely, like, in the moment where Kratos is beating his face in, I was getting flashbacks to, like, Kratos v Poseidon in God of War 3.
No, I think there's an element of, like, you're supposed to see the evil monster in that moment, because I think that's, like, a big part of the theme of the game is like, if Kratos kills a bunch of fucking gods out of vengeance or family or whatever, then he is no better. And I think that goes into, like, the big themes of fate in the game. So, like, he goes to the Norns, and the Norns are like, there isn't a fate, there isn't a script. The thing is you are just you, and you're gonna do what you do.
Yeah, you're predictable.
And you're predictable. You're the choices you make, and you make the same choices. And so by that point, Kratos has to come to terms with, like, am I just going to fucking murder everybody because they threaten my family? Or is there a better path forward?
Yeah.
And I think Atreus also offers the difference.
Is God of War just a franchise about a dude killing gods?
Yeah. This was the game that decided whether or not that was the case.
Yeah. And then in that fight with Thor, he decides, no, I'm not going to be that guy. And that's what changes his fate. He talks to Thor, and they find a common ground.
Yep. I'm trying to think of whether or not we should talk more about gameplay or some of the more side stuff. Like, what did you think of, let's stay on story a little bit more. What did you think about Ratatoskr?
Ratatoskr, Pro ZD?
Yeah, the Pro ZD, man. They still have Troy Baker as the bitter squirrel, but it's still funny.
I didn't remember Bitter Squirrel from 2018. Maybe was that like a power you got, or?
Yes, Atreus can summon animals, right?
Yeah.
So when he could summon Ratatoskr, and Ratatoskr would basically talk shit.
Okay.
That's what
I don't think I ever used that. So that when they were like, "Oh, it's our buddy Ratatoskr," no memory
You're like,
of that.
What? It's much like Kingdom Hearts with Simba, where it's like, you were a summon in the last game,
no,
Simba.
Genuinely, I was remembering the scene in the Mulan world with Mushu.
Yes, where the summons remember Sora. It's like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
This makes sense, I guess.
I think Ratatoskr is an example of how well this game does comedy. Because, Ratatoskr is effectively like a comedic relief character. But he's comedic relief at your own, like, want to get comedic relief, if that makes sense.
I
Like,
was worried Ratatoskr was Odin because of the eye patch.
oh no, yeah, I can see how you could have seen that. Um,
Yeah, that was the bait for me. I took that bait instead. I was a fool.
you thought at the end Odin was gonna like bust out the 6 leaned worms and like,
Yeah.
um,
I thought Ratatoskr would be like, "Oh, I know a way to Asgard. I'm all through the tree," and then he would have done that. But then Tyr started doing it, and I was like, "Oh, maybe it's him. Who knows?"
yeah, yeah. But I think this game does have like some very funny lines. But they're always like done. There's no, there's no, well, that went well line, you know?
Yeah, it's tasteful humor.
But did you get the PlayStation All Stars reference dialogue?
I did, and I also got a bunch of the poems because the poems are PlayStation references.
Yeah, yeah. That when Mimir started talking about like, oh, I heard you were in like a tournament with princesses, the undead, and the world's greatest musician, and I was like, what God of War game is this? He he's talking about PlayStation All Stars.
Iconic, iconic. Yeah, that's. I think that's important too because it's like the Greek trilogy is not that different from fucking PlayStation All Stars in how stupid it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like it's all canon for Kratos. Kratos has been around the block.
Yeah, I what I wanted from this game going into it was I wanted a lot more references to the Greek side of the franchise.
I think you got that.
No, I did, because when like Kratos starts talking about his brother, and I was like, oh my god, they're talking about Deimos. Thank you. um,
There we go.
you know, and they touch on like Persephone, which is from Chains of Olympus,
And he also
things
talks
like that.
about the Oracle, and he talks about what was it? And the Oracle and the Sisters of Fate.
Yeah.
He talks about both of those.
The only thing that was I think I wanted was like a full on like flashback, or like when you're visiting the Norns, if they did like
Yes.
an old young Kratos versus old Kratos fight. Like, this is who you used
I'm
to
surprised there was no Greek references in the Norn nightmare of Kratos.
Yeah, that's
Instead,
what I was
it was
expecting.
much more about. Yeah, I was expecting that because you'd think it would still haunt him. I guess that's the one thing that like sticks to me about Kratos' character is I don't know how much the Greek tragedies haunt him still. Does that make sense? I think he's emotionally past it now.
I think, well, because the thing that's like I think everyone was wondering playing 2018 was like how much like time has passed. What happened between God of War 3 and now? You know, and it turns out that they explained that in a comic book released alongside Ragnarok. But I also realize now I don't want those answers. I don't need those answers. The only thing I am wondering is like, did Greece recover? You know, because a big thing with God of War 3 is every god Kratos kills makes like the environment worse for mortals. The seas rise, the crops die, storms destroy entire cities.
Well,
And
that was also a big part of this game was like Odin was like, "What kind of god are you, Kratos? No one worships you, dog. Like you just fucking murder other gods.
Yeah.
Like what the fuck?"
and I think it just really needed a scene. What would have pushed it over for me is really having a scene where like Atreus reconciles with like how much damage Kratos did. Because it's one thing to say like I killed a pantheon. It's another thing to say like, and by killing that pantheon, I doomed thousands to
Yeah.
uncomfortable death.
No, let's talk about Mimir real quick
Love Mimir.
because we're still on story. Mimir is great. He has formed a full camaraderie with Kratos. I like how Kratos is open to friends. Brock is his friend, he considers, and Mimir is clearly like wise counsel for Kratos now.
Yeah, I love like just all
Quite
the
literally
moments where,
attached at the hip.
I like just all the moments where they just powwow, where like Mimir's like, hey, Kratos, can we just have a minute, you and me, and talk this over?
Yeah.
Because they compensate for each other's like weaknesses, where Mimir has all the knowledge, but Kratos has like all the street smarts, for lack of a better word.
The wisdom of experience, you know what I mean? Especially of like battle and like how these things go. I think Kratos has like some really interesting perspective and philosophy in this one. 2018 characterizes him as, I don't think it's necessarily like a bad characterization. It's more like he had growing up to do, where he was bad at telling stories, where he was difficult to connect to Atreus. So like the entirety of 2018 was him trying to connect with his son. This one is much more like they're connected. Kratos knows how to do that now. And here he just functions way smarter with wisdom. Like for instance, the mask. The mask is a really good example where everybody else is like, oh, these could be even Odin Tyr. Odin Tyr is like, yo, dude, the mask is the answer to everything. We gotta fucking do this. And Kratos is like, yo, dude, if there's a shortcut to learning your purpose in life, don't take the shortcut ever. That's what Kratos says, and it's like you believe him. That is good wisdom, you know?
Yeah, but even in that final moment with Odin, he gives like Atreus the choice to use the mask or not. He trusts him.
That's exactly, and that's the powerful thing, is building trust in this game. Because Atreus goes off on his own. He's a reckless teenager. He feels like there's some secrets worth keeping, which there are.
Yeah.
And there's things that Kratos can't understand because he's old, man. No, I'm just kidding. But like, and so by the end of Ragnarok, what happens is he trusts Atreus. So when Atreus says, no, these people are good, or we should save the Midgardians, or this or this, Kratos trusts him, and it leads to a much better outcome than the prophecy.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of rolling back to like one of the first topics brought up, how did you feel about Freya's involvement?
Not amazing. And I think there's an element where she really works. I think she has too much runtime. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the voice actress sort of settled on a particular cadence that works as like cutscene character, but doesn't really work when she has to like say like game dialogue like, I wonder if you can solve the problem from up here, or things like that.
She becomes the long-term companion after Atreus leaves.
Yeah.
So like as a long-term companion, it doesn't, no, yeah, she doesn't necessarily pop very well. And I don't necessarily know how you felt, but I felt like the forgiveness was rushed. I understand that at that point in time, she was just like, Kratos is the best way to kill Odin. She just saw that. She was like, oh, Kratos will fucking murder Odin if he has the opportunity. So let's just do that. But like, even then, I felt like they started getting over it too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it just shows that if I had my guess, it would be that the devs weren't certain what they were going to do with Freya at the end of 2018. So they left it like, ambiguous, but she's going to be an enemy, but maybe, because narrative, she's going to turn to an ally again. I think that came about like much too sudden, because it's like you have Atreus going to Jotunheim, and then he's back, and then Freya attacks them, and just completely, it's like, this is the Freya plot now.
Yeah, it's very clear that there's, when we talk about how big this game is really big, and I don't necessarily think I would have wanted a third game to split these. I wouldn't want to split. I would have wanted some of this content to have been in 2018 as DLC or something. Like, for instance, setting up the Angrboda stuff. I think that would have been like that would have been fun. DLC where you play as Atreus learning about Angrboda or some shit. Yeah. I think that would have worked out fine.
I could have seen that. The Angrboda part, I think, definitely goes on a bit long, but it's also your only time with that character.
I think this game is all about like, since this is the game we are introducing the character, here's 3 hours with this character. So you know the character front and back by the end of it,
Yeah, but then you have
instead of a slow build.
Then you have characters like Freyr and his merry band. And
they feel understated.
Yeah, I love the scene with the Traveler guy taking out those dragons, but at the same time, it's like, who is that?
Yeah, there wasn't enough time with him. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like Freya's character. I think it really says something that the devs don't really know how to write her particular type of like traumatized character, when she's like venting at Kratos and he all he has to say is like, I killed my first family. I was tricked into killing my first
Yeah.
family, and she immediately shuts up. You
Yeah.
know, uh, I don't know, something about that whole sequence with freeing her felt very awkward. Uh,
It's corny dialogue where it's like, oh, there was another, and it's like, yo, dog, I I don't know how to convince. I don't know how to tell you, Freya,
yeah,
but he was in Greece. All right, that's a completely different world. How did you not possibly conceive that there was other things going on? But
yeah,
it's clear that I guess one of the interesting things is that aspect of Kratos isn't told in the mythology of who he is, because other people know Kratos. There's like a rumor going around that there's a fucking dude that kills gods, and it's like, that he killed a fucking entire pantheon, and apparently because he had a hissy fit, but which is a good line by Thor.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
apparently they don't necessarily know that it's because the gods enslaved him and had him kill his family. Like, that deep lore is like unknown to other people, but it's known to the audience, so I guess it works.
Yeah, yeah. No, Kratos has canonically killed every member of his immediate family.
Atreus better watch out. We'll talk about what I think of sequels in a bit. Let's go into gameplay real quick. Let's talk more about it, because I feel like for a game with game and story, there is a lot of game there. I like the segments that I'm so glad we're not in a boat for most of it anymore.
You get a
And
sled.
I like the environments. You get a sled. I think the environments are way prettier. For the
Oh,
most
yeah.
part, you're stuck in Midgard in 2018.
I
There's different elements of 2018 where you could go to like Helheim or Muspelheim, and there'd be colors. Basically, they'd be like a singular color, and that's it. And those stay if you visit them in Ragnarok. But like Svartalfheim, Vanaheim, they have lush environments to them. You know what I mean?
I just don't get the hardcore gamers when they say that this game is full of reused assets and levels. I'm just like,
Yeah.
what part of 2018 resembles Vanaheim or Jotunheim in this? You know, like Vanaheim has like a whole like jungle segment, and then you can
Yes.
find a second part of the map that's like savannah with like completely different environments and enemies. No, the game is just like gorgeous, and I think it's really good at having, because going back to those side quests, there are some areas that exist only for the side quest, whereas in like some other open world type games, they would repurpose areas for multiple side quests, you know?
Yeah.
And it just feels
Exactly.
like those side quests are now incentivized. It's like, I'm going to go to some place I haven't been before and stumble across some new loot, some new puzzles and challenges and things. And that's
Yep.
such good incentive, because I think the combat in this is so weighty and fun, and it's fun to experiment with like different things you can combine together. Like I did
Yep.
some crazy stuff of like hitting a guy with drop near spears and then freezing them and then detonating the spears. Um, like really giving you those three weapons that have such different combat styles and utility. And
Yeah.
then that applies also to the environmental puzzles, like figuring out how you can combine the axe and the spear and the blades to solve different puzzles in tandem. I think that's all great.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think there's a lot more options. They also give you a lot more options in just like the small details, like your options for Spartan Rage are different. You just have extra options everywhere, and the fleshing out of each individual weapon and play style makes the game feel fuller. It's very important.
There's
it
a
did
lot
that.
of there's a
And
lot of horizontal progression, particularly with like the armor sets and things, where I was constantly like upgrading all my armor because I'm like, oh, I want to be able to do this and this and this at different times.
yeah,
I think that's all great.
I 100% agree. And like in terms of bosses, for instance, I love. We can keep talking about bosses. I love Garm's boss fight where you're sort of like. I love the parry stuff. I love parrying in these games because it feels like a good weight balance. And this game also has like the blue thing where you have to like double tap for like the extra
Yeah,
parry.
the shield
And
bash.
I love the shield bash. All that is super fun. And so when you hit Garm, Garm is just like, I don't know. He has like a great mix of like mid range.
Garm
and, like,
plays at a distance, But then when he
Yes.
so it's hard to close that distance, but when he comes into attack, that's your chance to stun him and keep him close to
Yes.
you so you can unload. And that's such a great
Yes.
like dance. I think it like kind of falls apart in the last bit when he's like at a distance shooting like blocks of ice at you.
I think whenever a boss does that, they're sort of phoning it in. They're getting a little tired. They're getting a little sleepy. But yeah, I love the environments. I love the boss fights in this. This feels like an out and out upgrade and payoff to what 2018 was, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I
in a
th-
lot of ways, gameplay and story.
yeah, I think like this one I would have more understanding being like this changes like the scope of AAA games. Um, One thing that I kind of stumbled on playing this, and I've also been replaying Days Gone, is I think we have moved past AAA games trying to be movies, and now it's trying to be prestige television in terms of pacing, you know?
Yeah,
And this feels very episodic. Like there are multiple parts where it's like, okay, that's where that episode ends. That's where that season break is. Even the
yeah,
side quests themselves kind of feel like episodes of a show, like building up, like time in between, like the big like season premiere, season finale.
yeah. Where there's conclusions even to the small stuff that's way more satisfying and built for that sort of thing. Whew. Um, so let me ask you: Are we wrapping up number one, or did you want to talk about gameplay more?
No, I think that's. I'm good on gameplay. I think no one talks that Ingrid died, and that bums me. Because I liked Ingrid as in a companion.
I agree. I think Ingrid was the best part of Atreus's toolkit. I liked Ingrid a lot.
Mm.
Let me ask you, how do you feel about post game and looking forward to future titles?
I like how this handles the post game. It's my favorite type of post game where it's literally set after the campaign and there's some like additional dialogue and like things you can do. You can like come across like the other characters just chilling out in different worlds.
I basically, number one, I went to the funeral for Brock.
Yeah.
I freed Real Tear. And then I looked up on YouTube some of the random character interactions, like Thrud finding Mjolnir,
Hmm.
or the first King of Denmark human Link ripoff, uh,
Is
trying to
that who
recover
he
Odin's
is? Is
coin.
that who
Yes,
realistic Link
I
is?
looked him up. Yes, that he is the first King of Denmark. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I guess because I that legitimately that character, I was like, why is he here? What does he accomplish in the story?
I said it in like the private chat. I think for the function of the story, because he didn't need to be there, and I don't think he's in Ragnarok. I think there's the first king of Finland, Ragnar, is in Ragnarok, like the Norse myth, if I remember right. But that being said, I think he serves as like a Midgardians are okay type thing, where it
Yeah.
gives that human element to it, where, and especially for Atreus, where Atreus is like, hey, um let's
Well,
not kill
also,
humans. That's
it's like
probably
the
a good thing.
first time in either of these games that they actually speak to just normal humans, you know?
Yes. Yeah, you get that sense to it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love seeing that sort of, you get conclusions to the conclusions. You know
Mhm.
what I
Mhm.
mean? That
Yeah.
that open things up in a satisfying way. And yeah, seeing Real Tear was a treat. He's still like, mythical and introspective, but in a much more appropriate way. You know
Yeah,
what I
there's
mean?
not a sense of cowardice about him, and you can really see, like, how, in Mimir's words, like, Odin's version of Tyr is just a cruel mockery of the original.
Yes. Yeah. Where like Tyr is a god for peace and war, and but like Odin sees that as a joke. He sees it cowardly. He sees it as a fucking wimp. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, it just works seeing him in post game. Um, and I guess my thing is where do you think this series is gonna go?
It's one of those things where I'm like, I don't want another entry. This is a good cap, because it's one of those circumstances where another entry would mean like, okay, new character problems, new character arc, when like where this ends feels like a perfect conclusion for Kratos. Like I'm so happy Kratos did not actually die, you know?
Well,
And
I guess that I guess that's the hard thing is it's like I feel like any sort of sequel setup is setting up as Atreus as the protagonist.
Yeah, Atreus.
I
I
think
would
that
be
has the
fine with an Atreus game, like Atreus Angraboda. I kind of had like an idea earlier today that's like Atreus in Rome, and sort of because Rome, like, what if like in lore the Roman gods are like the Greek ones reborn, and that allows Atreus to like truly see where his dad came from, what his dad did. And he says he's going to go find the missing giants. There's a big story in Roman and Greek myth called the Gigantomachy, where the Greek and Roman gods fought some giants that showed up out of nowhere. They could do
yeah.
something with that. If we're going like what mythology I would like to see represented, I think going like Mayan, doing like the Popol Vuh story would be super cool. The weebs are going to ask for Japan, and I think that's fine. Um, I just don't want to see another one for like 5 years minimum. You know,
I think development time means like 5 years realistically, especially when Ragnarok was different because they did end up using like a lot of the same stuff. But like if you go Egypt, you have to completely redo the game. And the other thing about like going Egypt or whatever is you have to use an entirely new cast, even though there's so much left unsaid about this cast. I
mm-hmm.
have the feeling that they're going to bring this cast into, especially Mimir. I think Mimir is going to stick around because technically Mimir is in this game. They wrote Mimir's Celtic.
Yeah, he's a Fae, and you know what? Going Celtic, going like Fae, having like featuring in like a character like Cuchulainn. If you know that from Celtic myth, that would be I could see this team handling that really well. If you don't know it, Cuchulainn is like Celtic Hercules, but he's also the Incredible Hulk. Um,
Mm-hmm.
doing something like that, but it's also like I don't want another European God of War. And
It's tough. It's tough because it's also like where do you go from here? Because I think Odin was the exact opposite of Zeus in
yeah,
in the asshole way. You know what I mean? Whereas like Zeus is just like explicitly like
a wall.
washboard evil asshole, and then Odin was like a weird sneaky mischievous asshole.
Yeah,
So I don't know where you go after that. And if the games are no longer about god killing, where are we at?
God of
It's
War
tough.
city
I
building
have no
sim.
idea. Yeah, clearly.
If they want to be like, hey, Kratos, we heard about this land across the sea. We're calling it Vinland, and then that's how Kratos gets to America. Sure. I just don't.
Oh, man.
It's one of those ones where I would only want it if they have an idea for a story, and I want like a reveal trailer like we got for the original God of War 2018, where it's like, oh my God, they're bringing that back.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I had in my head, the one thing I imagined, and this is so cliche, I actually don't want it, but I feel like they set it up in this one because they set up like Atreus's voice in his head will guide Kratos, and Kratos' voice will guide Atreus as like sort of talking talking heads to for their conscience. So in my head, one of the sequels in fucking 10 years, if this is still how predictable video game storytelling is Atreus is a young man and he is now talking to his older father, and his older father is just the voice in his head. Yeah. Kratos has been dead and he passed away fucking eons ago or whatever. And like it's about Atreus learning to let go or whatever.
I don't want a game where we actually see Kratos die, because this here is his conclusion. Like the moment right before the credits hit where he sees his own shrine and sees that it's been painted over with this new like vision of his future. I think that's like such a beautiful moment and like such great acting on Christopher Judge and the animators' parts with like Kratos is like trembling at the thought of him finally being like respected and revered as a heroic god.
Do you think this was game of the year 2022? Do you think this was storytelling of the year, best narrative of 2022?
Yeah. I think like now that I've beaten it, this versus Elden Ring, I would pick this as my game of the year, but it's also like the kind of game and storytelling that I gravitate to.
Sure.
You know.
It's tough because I think Elden Ring has its own strengths to it. It goes into like dissecting what people want out of narratives, but I think the scale of what God of War Ragnarok is, I think the most important thing to stress to people, in if I could leave this podcast with anything, is that games like this are good, or at least okay. I think maybe the scale of industry and like developer abuse or, you know, making unsustainable product is bad, but the game itself is fun and it's good storytelling. And just because it sometimes functions like a movie or a good TV show doesn't mean it's bad. You know what I mean? If a movie has a good soundtrack to it, we don't say, stay in your lane, movie. You should be a movie first.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We never do that to a movie.
Yeah,
So,
no, I think, like, this is something I would put, like, one of those people that, like, AAA games are such low-tier storytelling. I would, like, have them, like, play this. Um,
well, and I also think it's so different to play it versus watch it. I think a lot of people watch on YouTube this stuff, and like, yes, there is absolutely an aspect lost because you're playing for huge chunks of time. This is a, you know, XYZ hour game. I don't know how long it was.
I beat
but
it
was a long
30
game.
hours.
And I am sure, I would say 24 of those hours were actual gameplay.
Yeah.
Top. You know what I mean? Like, at least. So, like, there is a game there. I promise there is. And it's satisfying. Is it the most innovative or the most complex? No, but it wasn't trying to be.
It's good pizza.
You know?
You know, that's my...
It's good pizza.
It's good pizza. Just, like, it doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It just has to be... It just kind of is one of the best wheels we've ever gotten.
Sure. And I think Judge did a really good performance as Kratos. I do think Judge deserved that. I haven't played Immortality. Maybe Immortality has really good scene stealing stuff. Maybe. But like this, I think Judge really brought his all to the emotions of Kratos. Because it's hard to have emotions as a stoic guy, you know?
Yeah. And I think just some of his line reads just kind of evoke this very intense emotion. And it's like, I have to keep reminding myself, like, oh no, this isn't the original guy who played Kratos, you know? Because he does really carry that feeling that this is a guy with a history. This is a guy that has done a lot of things he has regretted. And that, you know, I feel like if I asked, like, Christopher Judge Kratos, like, name all the people you've killed, he would be able to do it flawlessly. That's just how of the franchise as a whole this feels. It's not like they just, like, took a random, like, video game protagonist and it's like, okay, here he is in complete lore reboot mode, in name only character, you know?
Yeah. I think Judge saw Kratos and recognized the weight and tried to bring the weight into how he performs. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And not the weight of expectation or like, oh my god, this is a video game character, but more like the weight of like what Kratos has done, what he means, and how he functions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's just a good game.
What do we have any other notes?
I thought Suitor, his voice actor, is really good. And his visual performance, I love the line where he's like, you ever been in love? It's pretty good. But ultimately, the Ragnarok beast kind of fell flat the moment they were like, oh no, we've got a Ragnarok beast, you know? I think that could have been
Ragnarok kind of sucks. Like, the actual Ragnarok, it's not good.
Yeah. Everything from, like, getting to Asgard and then to the Thor fight, I don't know. I think it wasn't as intense as I would have liked, but, you know, I'm not a game designer, so I don't know how I would have done it.
Well, maybe that's part of the thing. Whereas, like, when you think Ragnarok, you think the end of the world, and you think the end of... honestly, you do think fucking God of War, where you fucking kill everything.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the game at that point was like, no, we're beyond that. So then you have to be beyond Ragnarok, but then you set up Ragnarok. And then you put so much effort into having it happen. So then when it happens, it's like none of the characters want it to happen. So then it's like, I don't know. It feels weird. It's a mixed feeling, but I think it is intended.
Yeah. I think it just has that awkward moment where you've beaten Odin and Sindri's killed him, and then it's like, uh-oh, Ragnarok is here, we need to peace out. And then Freyr and Ingrid die. And it just didn't feel like it has that weight because it happens so suddenly and it's kind of an emotional whiplash. I don't know what I would have done differently. I just know what they went with is like a little bit awkward.
I agree. Yeah, but overall, you think this is going to be one of your game of the years? You think it's good?
I think
Great.
I would be shocked if I had like a complete 180 on my opinion on this game. Like something real bad would have had to have happened. Like Christopher Judge would have had to have been outed as like a cannibal or something, you know?
Oh, I'll say real quick because we mentioned Thor for like 30 seconds tops. I like the recovering alcoholic angle, and I like Thrud.
Yeah.
I think Thrud is a good daughter, and I think the recovering alcohol
is it
subplot works.
Yeah, because it is ultimately like a story about I think Donkey put it best, where it is a story about three dads, three mothers, and three children, and their relationships to each other, and having like really showing. Because I would have been like, oh no, Thor is going to be set up as like the anti Kratos. You know, he is incapable of changing. He is just this destroyer. But then subverting that and being like, well, why is he the way he is? Was beautiful, and having like that whole tavern scene with him and Thrud. That's like some of the best video game acting I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it feels like a Loki Thor adventure, even when you have very little time as Loki in Asgard.
Yeah. I like that his belly has jiggle physics.
That's important. That's an essential mechanic. They needed to get it just right.
Is it weird that you never saw Forseti on screen? I was just thinking.
Which one's Forseti?
Forseti is the other son of Odin. You can see his door. They say his name all the time. Because there's that part where like Odin is like, I know Garm is free. Forseti just confirmed it, but we never actually see Forseti.
Forseti was chilling somewhere else.
Yeah,
he's somewhere else.
He
was like, after Heimdall died, I'm gonna dip out.
Whenever Forseti's not on screen, all the characters should be like, "Where's Forseti?"
Yeah. Odin's like, I killed my entire family, and Forseti's like, not me. What the fuck?
Yeah, maybe that's DLC. Maybe that's secret content.
We'll see what happens. Forseti DLC clearly will sell gangbusters. All right. I think we're done here.
Yeah, this has been a nice bonus episode.
Yep. Play God of War. It's fun. It's good.
Play God of War. Play God of War Ragnarok. Play Heavenly Sword. There
we go.
I can't think of any other God of War likes. Play Marlowe Briggs, whatever that game was.
I'm actually playing Last of Us now. This is the first time I've actually sat down to play Last of Us. Because now I'm in the AAA zone. After you get a PS5, you've admitted
that's another one of those
submission.
That's another one of those dad games.
Yeah, dad game, movie game, stay in your lane video games. But we're gonna see how I feel about it at some point in time. That will be a what you playing. Look forward to that, listeners. And farewell, I guess.
Yeah. Good night and good luck.